The stars were exceptionally bright that night, like tiny diamonds scattered across black velvet. Chloe Young stared up at them, her breath creating small clouds in the cool night air. At 11 years old, she already knew more constellations than most adults, and she took pride in that knowledge. The telescope her parents had given her for her birthday was propped beside her as she lay on the grass outside their camping tent, a few yards away from where her parents slept. "I'll find a new star someday," she whispered to herself, a promise she'd made countless times before. Her fingers traced invisible lines between the stars, connecting them in patterns of her own creation. The Young family had chosen this remote spot in northern Michigan precisely because of its dark skies away from city lights and perfect for stargazing. Chloe had begged for this trip for months. Now, wrapped in her favorite blue blanket, she was determined to stay awake as long as possible, counting meteors and dreaming of distant worlds. She must have dozed off because when she opened her eyes, the stars were moving. No, not the stars. Something was moving among them, something large and silent, blocking out constellations as it descended. Chloe blinked hard, certain she was dreaming. The object grew larger, its outline becoming clearer against the night sky. "Mom?" she called softly, then louder. "Dad." But her voice died in her throat as a beam of pale blue light surrounded her. She felt weightless, her body rising from the ground, the telescope and blanket falling away. Chloe tried to scream, but no sound emerged. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was the distant shape of their family tent growing smaller beneath her. Captain Shaw of the collection vessel, Pearl 459, observed the small creature being loaded into the specimen hold with mild interest. As a seasoned collector for the collective, Shaw had captured countless primitive species from unregistered planets throughout this sector. This particular specimen, bipedal relatively hairless, resembled several other sentient species, though its technology level appeared minimal. "Vital signs stable," reported the ship's system. "Specimen appears to be juvenile." Shaw nodded, making a mental note to classify this one for the biological repository on Nexus Station. The collective's mission to document all sentient life was a noble one, Shaw believed, even if it occasionally meant removing samples from their natural habitats. This planet, designated simply as Blue 3 in their charts, showed promising biodiversity but unremarkable technological advancement. "Set course for Nexus," Shaw commanded. "Standard speed." The Pearl 459 hummed as it accelerated beyond the solar system, leaving the small blue planet behind. In the specimen hold, Chloe Young remained unconscious, monitored by systems designed for creatures far different from humans. Shaw was just beginning to record preliminary observations when the first alarm sounded. "Warning, navigation anomaly detected. Gravitational disturbance at coordinates ahead." The captain moved quickly to the control platform. "Adjust course. Avoid the disturbance." Unable to comply, disturbance expanding. The ship shuddered violently. Shaw steadied herself against a console, mandibles clicking with concern. This sector was supposed to be stable gravitational. Anomalies were rare here. Through the viewing portal, space itself seemed to warp and bend. "Emergency protocols. Prepare for..." The ship lurched sideways, throwing Shaw against the wall. Systems flashed red across all displays. The Pearl 459 spun wildly as it was pulled toward a small rocky planet that had not been in their charts. "Impact imminent. Brace for crash landing." Shaw barely had time to activate personal protection shields before the ship slammed into the surface of an unknown world. Metal screamed against rock as the vessel skidded across barren ground before coming to rest half submerged in a murky lake. Emergency lights cast eerie blue shadows as systems failed one by one. In the darkness of the specimen hold, Chloe woke to pain and confusion. Her head throbbed, and something warm trickled down her forehead. Opening her eyes, she saw only darkness at first. Then faint emergency lighting revealed her surroundings, a transparent enclosure within a larger room filled with similar containers. Some held plants, others small creatures that moved sluggishly in their prisons. "Hello?" She called, her voice sounding strange even to her own ears. "Is anyone there? Please help me." The ship groaned around her metal, contracting as it cooled. She could hear water lapping against something nearby, and realized with horror that the room was slowly tilting, water beginning to seep under the door. Panic seized her. Chloe pounded against the transparent wall of her prison. "Help, someone, please help me." In the control room, Shaw regained consciousness to the sound of alarms and the ship's automated voice repeating, "Critical damage sustained, systems failing. Water ingress detected." Water. Shaw's species held an instinctive fear of bodies of water evolved from millennia on a desert homeworld, but the specimen hold was in the lowest level, already taking on water according to the few functioning sensors. Most captains would evacuate, save themselves. The specimens were expendable, that was collective protocol. But something about the small bipedal creature's expression, when Shaw had first seen it being loaded aboard, troubled the captain. There had been not just fear, but awareness, intelligence. "Access specimen hold controls," Shaw commanded, limping toward the emergency shaft. Unable to comply, systems disconnected. Shaw hesitated only briefly before descending into the flooding lower decks. The captain's exoskeleton would provide limited protection, but not for long in deep water. Every instinct screamed against this action. The water was knee-deep by the time Shaw reached the specimen hold. Through the doorway, the captain could see most containers had broken open in the crash, their contents either escaped or dead. But one remained intact near the far wall, where a small creature was pressed against the transparent barrier, eyes wide with terror. Shaw's translator implant was still functioning enough to detect the creature's vocalizations as language attempts, though the patterns were unfamiliar. The water rose steadily as Shaw waded toward the container, fighting primal fear with each step. The release mechanism was manual, requiring precision. Shaw's trembling limbs could barely manage. Water now reached the captain's thorax, causing painful spasms in respiratory organs evolved for arid environments. The container finally opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The creature the girl recoiled initially, then reached out uncertainly as Shaw gestured toward the exit. No time for proper communication protocols. They needed to move quickly. Shaw pointed urgently toward the emergency shaft as water continued to rise. The girls seemed to understand, swimming alongside as they made their way through the flooding corridor. They had nearly reached the shaft when a secondary explosion rocked the ship. A support beam crashed down, striking Shaw directly. Pain flared through the captain's left side as they were pushed underwater by the impact. Chloe had been terrified of the alien creature. At first, its insect-like appearance and clicking mandibles were unlike anything she'd ever seen. But when it had opened her prison, instead of leaving her to drown, she'd understood it was trying to help. Now, seeing it struggling underwater, pinned by debris, Chloe didn't hesitate. Taking a deep breath, she dove beneath the surface. The beam was heavy, but adrenaline gave her strength as she pushed against it, creating just enough space for the creature to pull free. Together, they surfaced the alien, making distressed clicking sounds as it struggled to stay afloat. Chloe grabbed what appeared to be an arm or limb, helping to keep its head above water as they made their way to the emergency shaft. The creature was surprisingly light. In the water, its exoskeleton seemingly hollow in places. They climbed the shaft to a higher level where the flooding hadn't yet reached. The alien collapsed once they were safe. Its breathing labored and one limb bent at an unnatural angle. Despite her fear and confusion, Chloe felt concern for the being that had saved her life. "Thank you," she said, knowing it couldn't understand but hoping her tone would convey her meaning. "My name is Chloe." The creature's large compound eyes studied her for a long moment before it made a series of clicks and whistles. It pointed to itself with an undamaged limb. "Shaw?" It said, the sound awkward and clearly difficult to produce with its mandibles. Chloe's eyes widened. "Shaw, that's your name?" She pointed to herself. "Chloe." The creature Shaw repeated her name with fair accuracy. Then, using the wall for support, it rose and gestured for Chloe to follow. They made their way to what appeared to be a command center, now dark except for emergency lighting. Through a large viewport, Chloe could see an alien landscape, purple-tinged, sky-rocky terrain, and the murky lake their ship had crashed into. No signs of civilization or rescue were visible. Shaw manipulated controls, but most screens remained dark. The few that functioned displayed symbols Chloe couldn't understand, though the red flashing ones needed no translation. They were in trouble. Over the next several days, Chloe learned that the ship's communication systems were irreparably damaged. The emergency beacon was functional, but had limited range. A rescue could take weeks or longer to arrive if anyone detected it at all. The planet, which Shaw called Felon 6, through a combination of gestures and slowly improving verbal attempts, was habitable but barely. The air was breathable for both of them, though it left Chloe constantly thirsty. The water required filtering before it was safe to drink. The temperature fluctuated wildly between day and night. Shaw's injury meant Chloe had to handle most of the physical tasks, collecting water, searching the nearby landscape for anything edible, building a shelter from the ship's debris when it became clear they couldn't safely remain aboard the half-submerged vessel. Communication remained their greatest challenge. Shaw's translator had been damaged in the crash, functioning only sporadically. They developed a system of drawings in the dirt combined with gestures and a growing vocabulary of basic words each could pronounce in the other's language. It was during one of these communication sessions, about 2 weeks after the crash, that Chloe finally understood the full truth of her situation. Shaw had drawn the solar system, then the ship, then an arrow showing its journey. When Chloe saw herself depicted as being taken from Earth, she recoiled in shock. "You took me from my home," she asked, backing away. Shaw's mandibles clicked in what Chloe had come to recognize as discomfort or regret. The alien tried to explain something about collecting and studying, but the meaning was clear enough. Chloe ran from their camp, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't a crash survivor, she was a kidnapped specimen, an abductee. How could she have begun to trust her captor? Her parents must be frantic with worry. They might think she was dead. She found a spot overlooking the lake and sat there until sunset, hugging her knees to her chest. Shaw kept a respectful distance, but remained watchful. Eventually, hunger and practicality brought Chloe back to camp. "I want to go home," she said simply, knowing Shaw couldn't fully understand her words, but hoping the sentiment was clear. The alien captain nodded slowly, then pointed to the emergency beacon they'd salvaged from the ship. Shaw made the same beeping noise that had become their word for help coming. Despite her anger, Chloe knew she needed Shaw to survive, just as the injured alien needed her. They were unwilling companions in this disaster, but companions nonetheless. As days turned to weeks, their communication improved. Shaw taught Chloe about the Collective, a confederation of spacefaring species that had been exploring the galaxy for millennia. Humans had been classified as primitive, their planet designated for observation, only not contact. "But you contacted me," Chloe pointed out using a combination of words and drawings. Shaw's response took time to piece together, but the essence was clear. Captain Shaw hadn't seen Chloe as a person, but as a specimen no different from the plants and simple organisms that had been collected alongside her. It had been a professional assessment, not personal malice, but that hardly made it better. Yet Chloe couldn't maintain her anger in the face of their daily struggle for survival. Shaw's knowledge of astronomy and alien biology complemented her practical human skills of fire-making and shelter construction. The captain's injured limb was healing slowly, but the damage to the breathing apparatus in Shaw's exoskeleton meant the alien struggled in the humid air near the lake. "Why did you save me?" Chloe asked one night as they sat beside their small fire. "From the ship water bad for you." She had learned that Shaw's species were desert dwellers who found large bodies of water terrifying. Shaw was quiet for a long time before answering. "Your eyes, like my offspring." The alien made a gesture Chloe had come to associate with sadness. lost to illness, long ago. The admission changed something between them. No longer captor and captive, they were now simply two beings, stranded together, each with their own griefs and fears. It was nearly 2 months after the crash when Chloe first showed symptoms of illness. A persistent cough developed, followed by fever and weakness. Shaw recognized it immediately as something serious, perhaps a pathogen from the planet that Chloe's human immune system couldn't fight. Shaw searched the crashed ship for medical supplies, but those designed for a Pearl physiology were useless for a human. The captain became increasingly desperate as Chloe weakened, her breathing becoming labored, skin burning with fever. One morning, Chloe couldn't rise from her makeshift bed. "Shaw," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "if I don't tell my parents I'm sorry for going outside alone that night." Shaw refused to accept this outcome. The emergency beacon had shown no signs of being detected, but there was another option, one the captain had avoided due to its risks. The ship's main communication array was damaged, but not completely destroyed. It remained in the flooded lower sections of the vessel. Despite the primal terror of deep water, Shaw gathered makeshift breathing apparatus and dove into the submerged portion of the ship. The pain was excruciating, both physical and psychological, but the thought of Chloe's fading life drove the captain forward. It took 3 attempts to reach the communication array and another 2 to extract the critical components. When Shaw finally emerged, gasping and shaking violently, the equipment was clutched in trembling limbs. Working frantically, Shaw constructed a more powerful transmitter, using parts from the emergency beacon combined with the salvaged array. The message sent was simple, but urgent: distress signal coordinates and 2 critical additions. Shaw risked everything to include human aboard and the captain's personal identification code, which would tell the collective exactly who was responsible for the unauthorized collection of a sentient being. By including this information, Shaw was confessing to a serious violation of collective law, but it also meant that any rescue would include appropriate medical intervention for Chloe. It was, the captain knew, the only hope for the girl's survival. The response came faster than expected. Within days, a collective rescue vessel entered orbit around Felon 6. Their communication indicated they had received the distress call and were sending a shuttle. By then, Chloe was barely conscious. Her breathing shallow, Shaw sat beside her, one limb gently resting on her fevered forehead in a gesture of comfort learned from watching the girl when she thought about her parents. "Help coming," Shaw told her. "Real help." The rescue team was efficient but cold. They assessed the situation, provided immediate medical treatment to stabilize Chloe, and prepared both survivors for transport. The team leader and official from Security Division made it clear that Captain Shaw was under investigation and would face consequences for the unauthorized collection of a sentient being. The human specimen must be treated and returned to isolation, the official stated. It cannot be allowed contact with collective society. Shaw, now speaking through a functioning translator, once more responded with uncharacteristic defiance. "Her name is Chloe Young. She is not a specimen. She saved my life when she had every reason to let me die." The official dismissed this. "Your emotional attachment to the subject is noted but irrelevant. Protocol is clear." What the official couldn't understand, was how profoundly Shaw had been changed by these months on Felon 6. The captain had begun the journey as a dedicated collector, seeing other species as merely subjects for study and preservation. Now Shaw had experienced something the scientific protocols never accounted for: genuine connection with a being previously considered primitive. Aboard the rescue vessel, Shaw was placed under restricted movement, while Chloe was taken to the medical bay. The separation was painful for both of them. Despite improved translation technology, Chloe was frightened by the clinical approach of her new caretakers, who treated her more as a subject than a person. She called for Shaw repeatedly, but her requests were ignored. The medical team worked diligently to combat the alien pathogen in her system, but they had limited experience with human physiology. Days passed with little improvement. Chloe grew weaker despite their efforts. Shaw, meanwhile, faced interrogation from collective authorities. The captain admitted to all charges, but insisted on one demand: proper recognition of humans as sentient beings deserving full rights under collective law. They have art, culture, complex language, emotional intelligence, Shaw argued. The fact that their technology is less advanced than ours does not make them lesser beings. The interrogator was unmoved. Your pearl sentimentality is clouding your judgment, Captain. The approval committee has strict criteria for sentience classification. Humans have not been evaluated according to protocol and thus remain categorized as presentient. Shaw's status as a member of an influential pearl family provided some leverage. The captain requested a direct appeal to the committee, citing personal observation of human capabilities. I demand the right of witnessed testimony, Shaw stated, invoking an ancient but still valid collective procedure whereby first-hand experience could be submitted as evidence in classification disputes. While bureaucratic wheels turned slowly, Chloe's condition deteriorated. The medical team, unable to synthesize an effective treatment, estimated she had less than a standard cycle to live without intervention beyond their capabilities. When Shaw learned this, the captain used the final option available: a direct appeal to Pearl family authorities. As a member of the High Council, Shaw's parental unit had significant influence within the collective. It took precious hours to convince them of the urgency, but eventually they agreed to intervene. A specialist in xenobiology was dispatched to the rescue vessel with experimental treatments developed for similar physiologies. The timing was desperately close. By the time the specialist arrived, Chloe was unconscious, her systems beginning to fail. Shaw was finally permitted to visit her while the new treatments were being prepared. The captain approached the medical pod, carefully, shocked by how small and fragile the girl appeared. "I'm sorry," Shaw whispered in carefully practiced human speech. "I brought you here, my fault." To everyone's surprise, Chloe's eyes fluttered open. "Shaw," she murmured weakly. "Are we going home?" The captain gently took her hand, mimicking the human gesture of comfort Chloe had taught during their time together. "Yes, I promise." The specialist administered the experimental treatment while Shaw remained at Chloe's side, telling her stories of Pearl Homeworld and the wonders of the collective in an effort to keep her conscious and fighting. For a brief period, it appeared the treatment might succeed. Chloe's vital signs stabilized temporarily. She even managed to sit up and ask questions about the strange beings she'd glimpsed in the medical bay. But the improvement was short-lived. Within hours, her condition began deteriorating again. The pathogen had adapted to the treatment, becoming more aggressive. The specialist worked frantically to modify the approach, but each failure brought Chloe closer to the end. In her final hours, Chloe asked to see the stars. Against medical protocol, but with Shaw's insistence, they moved her pod to an observation deck with a clear view of space. "It's beautiful," she whispered, looking out at the unfamiliar constellations. "I always wanted to see the stars up close." Shaw sat with her through the night, translating Chloe's questions about distant worlds for the specialist who had remained to monitor her condition. They spoke of Earth, of Chloe's family, and of her dreams to become an astronomer someday. As dawn approached on the ship's artificial cycle, Chloe turned to Shaw. "Tell my parents I wasn't afraid," she said softly, "and tell them about the stars I got to see." She died quietly, her hand still in Shaw's as the nearest star to Felon 6 rose over the horizon, bathing the observation deck in golden light. Protocol dictated that her body be preserved for scientific study, the first complete human specimen in collective possession. But Shaw refused to allow it physically standing between the medical team and Chloe's body. "She will be returned to her people with dignity," the captain declared. "Not as a specimen, but as Chloe Young, a child of Earth who deserves to rest in her home soil." The dispute reached the highest levels of the collective. Shaw's family influence secured a temporary stay on any procedures until the classification hearing could be held. In an unprecedented move, Shaw requested that Chloe's body be preserved but untouched until a final determination could be made about human status. The hearing itself was historic, the first time a species classification had been challenged on the basis of personal testimony rather than scientific observation. Shaw spoke for 3 days, describing not just Chloe's intelligence, but her courage, compassion, and capacity for forgiveness. "She saved my life, knowing I had taken her from her home," Shaw testified. "She tended my injuries, helped me overcome my fear of water, and shared her knowledge freely. These are not the actions of a presentient being." The committee was divided. Many members, particularly from older species, argued that humans' limited space travel and relatively young civilization disqualified them from full sentience recognition. Others, moved by Shaw's testimony, advocated for an exception to the standard classification protocol. The deadlock broke when Shaw presented a final piece of evidence, a small notebook Chloe had created during their time on Felon 6. In it, she had drawn the alien landscape, written observations about Shaw's physiology and behavior, and even attempted to create a translation dictionary between English and Shaw's Pearl language. "This child with no training or technology attempted to understand me and my world," Shaw said. "She showed greater scientific curiosity and methodical thinking than many collective researchers I've served with." The committee reached a compromise. Earth would be reclassified as a potential contact world with a formal evaluation team to be sent to determine final status. In the meantime, Chloe's remains would be returned to her family with a carefully controlled explanation of her fate. Shaw insisted on leading the mission personally. "I took her," the captain said simply. "I should return her." The approach to Earth was conducted with extreme caution. Using advanced cloaking technology, a small collective vessel descended near the young family's home in northern Michigan. Local communications had been monitored long enough to confirm that Chloe's disappearance had been a source of ongoing anguish for her parents, who still held out hope for her return nearly a year after she vanished. Shaw modified with temporary appearance alterations to appear more humanoid, approached their home alone, except for a sealed container holding Chloe's body. The encounter was brief but profound. Mrs. Young opened the door to find what appeared to be a strange woman holding a small silver container. Before she could speak, Shaw's translator conveyed carefully prepared words. "I bring Chloe home. She was brave. She saw stars no human has seen. Her last words were of love for you." Understanding dawned in Mrs. Young's eyes, followed by shock, and then a grief so raw that Shaw physically staggered under its emotional weight. Mr. Young appeared behind his wife, his face hardening from confusion to rage when he comprehended what was happening. Shaw carefully placed the container on the doorstep, and then did something no collective representative had ever done in an unauthorized encounter. The captain knelt in a posture of complete submission. "I cannot undo what was done," Shaw said. "I can only return her and bear witness to who she was. She changed everything." Mrs. Young, through her tears, asked one question. "Did she suffer?" Shaw looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "She was brave always. At the end she saw wonders and felt no pain. She worried only for your sorrow." Mr. Young moved forward as if to strike Shaw, then stopped, his hand falling to the container instead. "Leave us," he said, his voice breaking. "Just leave us with our daughter." Shaw rose and backed away. "The stars she saw will remember her name," the captain said before turning to leave. The contact was brief, unauthorized, and technically a violation of multiple collective protocols. But it set in motion a process that would eventually lead to humanity's official recognition and years later formal first contact. Shaw faced consequences for the initial abduction, demotion, and reassignment to administrative duties far from any collection vessels. But the captain accepted this without complaint, focusing instead on becoming an advocate for reform in the collective's classification system and exploration protocols. 5 years after Chloe's death, when the collective officially established diplomatic relations with Earth, the young family was quietly approached by representatives seeking permission for a memorial. With their consent, a small monument was placed at the spot where Chloe had first been taken, not as a commemoration of first contact, but as a reminder of the must of ignorance and prejudice. The monument was simple. A bronze statue of a young girl looking up at the stars with inscriptions in both English and the collective's universal language. It read only, Chloe Young, the first human, 2034-2035. Among collective species, her story became legend. The child who changed an ancient system through the simplest and most profound of actions, treating an alien not as other, but as friend. For generations of collective youth especially, among the pearl to be like Chloe, meant to show courage and compassion beyond expectations. On Earth, few knew the full story. The young family never spoke publicly about their daughter's fate. Official accounts described the monument as commemorating an anonymous child whose imagination represented humanity's eternal quest for understanding. But twice each year on her birthday, and on the anniversary of her return, Shaw would visit the monument alone, placing a small collection of stones gathered from Felon 6 at its base. It was a Pearl tradition of remembrance honoring not just what was lost, but what had been found in the process. After decades of service as a cultural liaison between humans and the collective, Shaw returned to the monument one final time. Now aged and preparing for final transition, the captain had one last conversation with the bronze girl who forever looked to the stars. "You would be proud," Shaw told her. "Your people have joined the collective as equals. They teach us as much as we teach them, just as you taught me." As twilight fell and the first stars appeared overhead, a group of human children approached the monument on a school trip. Their teacher explained that this was an important historical site, though the details had been lost to time. One of the children, a girl about Chloe's age, noticed the elderly alien sitting nearby. "Excuse me," she said politely. "Did you know her?" The girl in the statue. Shaw looked at the child, curious, intelligent, unafraid of difference, and saw an echo of Chloe across the years. "Yes," the captain said simply. "She was the first human I ever truly saw." The teacher, noticing the conversation, came closer with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry if she's bothering you. They're learning about first contact history." Shaw shook a now humanoid head. "No bother. Perhaps you would permit me to tell them the true story. It seems fitting that they should know." As the children gathered around Shaw, began the tale of a girl who reached across the stars to save an enemy, and in doing so, saved two worlds from the loneliness of believing they were alone in the universe.